China is making it known where it stands on the conflict in Ukraine. In a Washington Post editorial, China's ambassador to the U.S., Gang, responded to claims that China had prior knowledge of Russia's military action. He wrote, Beijing is committed to an independent foreign policy of peace and that China decides its position based on the merits of the issue. China's position on Ukraine is objective and impartial. He reiterated that the purpose and principles of the UN Charter must be fully observed and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, including Ukraine, must be respected. Joining me now from Beijing is Einar Tangen, a political and economic affairs commentator. A lot to get here, Einar. First, I want to talk about this op-ed. All eyes around the world on China in recent days, trying to determine how China plans to navigate Russia, Ukraine, and pressure from the West. And I want to read a line to you from this Washington Post op-ed. The ambassador wrote that assertions that China knew about, acquiesced to, or tacitly supported this war are purely disinformation. That's an important line there.
Absolutely, Elaine. I mean, China really objects to this kind of ongoing pressure, this negative narrative that is always being pushed, mostly by the U.S. with this idea that somehow China had pre-knowledge or that it was delayed till after the Olympics. And the fact is that China was taken by surprise and had to move very quickly, like other countries, to evacuate students and staff from Ukraine.
What is the view from Beijing right now? Ambassador Gang also wrote that conflict, this is a quote, conflict between Russia and Ukraine does no good for China, and that had China known about the imminent crisis, we would have done our best to prevent it. Just paraphrasing there. More important distinctions there, because a lot of people in many countries, especially in the West, have been talking about what China could have done, what China can still do, and perhaps influencing President Putin to stop what's happening in Ukraine.
Well, Elaine, I mean, Xi Jinping has had a call with Putin. He did not have one with Zelensky. My guess is that he was asking that, there be some cessation in this. I mean, China is trying to maintain an open off-ramp. I mean, right now, things are spiraling downward. Not only the violence, but also diplomatically. The Council of Europe, Russia has withdrawn. People are putting sanctions on leaders, whether it's Russia on Canada or the U.S. on Russia. I mean, how is this going to be solved unless there is talk? I mean, at some point, hopefully soon, the violence will stop. China is just trying to stay out of this. When the UN resolution was passed, 52 countries either voted, 5 voted for Russia, the vast majority, 34, voted to abstain, and 12 did not vote at all. But if you add up all those countries, you'll see a pattern. They're the global south. They realize the old African adage, when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. And they have seen this. On one hand, people see that the U.S. was either ignored or deliberately went ahead with the expansion of NATO, knowing full well that this would enrage Russia. Russia invaded. No one supports that. Well, I don't think only a few countries support that. Right now, the question is, how do you get to peace? And these efforts to vilify anybody who's providing an off-ramp is really dangerous.
We saw some talks between Yang Jiechi and Jake Sullivan. They were pre-planned, but how important was this discussion in Rome? And is there really a balancing act for China right now between Russia and the West? Let's start though with those talks there in Rome.
Well, the talks, 7 hours of talks. A lot of the issues were pre-planned, as you pointed out. This meeting was arranged prior to the situation in Ukraine. But what was telling was the readouts from both sides did not agree. I mean, China's didn't mention Ukraine in particular because that was not part of this set agenda. Jake Sullivan's side, he said, this was the big issue. I'm sure it was mentioned, but there just does not seem to be a meeting of the minds as it comes to this. The U.S. wants everyone, quote, to jump on its side, despite the fact that many people see it as the instigator of this, going back to 2007. Many burns who is the current head of the CIA, said if we keep pushing NATO eastward, we're going to wind up, especially if it involves Ukraine, we're going to wind up in a war. So this seems to imply, and it doesn't seem to imply, it spells out explicitly that the U.S. was aware that their actions would be provocative and would end up in a war. So many countries see this and they just are not, they don't want to be part of this. Two wrongs do not make a right. Siding with either side is pointless. Right now, the only thing that matters are the deaths, needless deaths of Ukrainian people, and ending this war, and that is going to take diplomacy.
All right, Einar Tangen, always great to get your take. Thank you so much for joining us from Beijing.